What's up, everybody? Do-Rag Dev back here. Today, you already know how it works. We get fresh new music. We get fresh new Dev Del Molino reviews. So thus, I am here today talking about this new Logic album, Everybody. Logic is a Maryland-born rapper, actually been around for quite a while now, but has only been releasing studio albums since his debut came out in 2014. Under Pressure. Now, I've definitely been aware and somewhat been a fan of Logic since before those albums came out back in the Young Sinatra mixtape days. Even since the early days, I've been impressed with Logic's lyrical ability both in song and in freestyle, which he has showcased on a number of different radio stations over the years. And I don't really think at any point there was any questioning of his lyrical ability, his lyrical talent. More so my questions came on the end of his musical ability and his ability to put together a cohesive and strong project or album. Something I definitely didn't see in the mixtape days, though those were mixtapes and not albums. And with the two albums that he has released thus far, both in my opinion good, not great. But here we are today, listening to Everybody, the new album, and in the process of this album coming out, I found it to be a little bit more promising than what I heard with the previous two albums. Again, not to say that I hate those albums or I feel like, those albums are bad, because I don't, but I've always felt like Logic has the kind of tools at his disposal that a lot of other rappers do not. Therefore, he should be making albums that have much more signature sound to them and talk about topics that other rappers are not going to. And so in hearing the first single released from this album, the titular track Everybody, it didn't really blow me away with the sound on this song, nor did he do anything that I didn't already know he could do as a rapper on this track. But, I thought it was a solid track, and prior to the album's release, I thought this album artwork was incredible. But what it really was about this song that kind of roped me in the most was the lyrical topics that kind of came in and out of this song. I heard him kind of start to poke at the idea of being a person of mixed race, black and white, but not really looking the part, really just looking more so like a white person, and what that dynamic is like for him. Now, as someone who is a super duper light-skinned brother like myself, I feel that message, and so naturally I was pretty intrigued on this message, and it's something that shows up on the album quite a lot, and he fleshes out that dynamic to an extent that I find really interesting. Transitioning into the song Take It Back, at the end of this record, Logic provides us with a bit of a soliloquy about his life growing up, being born to a black father, a white mother, both addicted to drugs and other vices, not having a father around, but growing up in a toxic household with his mother, a woman who has children with several different black men, and for some reason finds it appropriate to call her mixed son a nigger. But as he explains it, going to school and being called a cracker, and not being accepted entirely by black people, not being accepted entirely by white people who told him that, he should be ashamed of his black side. And so I really want to admit my bias early on in that, messages like this speak to me so much because they are so personal. And that's kind of the beauty of music, is that, sometimes you get those messages that are very personal to you. That element of this enhanced this album a lot for me, just from the very start. It kind of gives us an idea of what some of the more grand ideas that, Logic is trying to portray in this album. Because what you find by the end of the LP is that Logic has taken a lot of specific social or personal issues, either things that are specific to him or something that applies to a much larger group of people. And I think overall, a lot of these topics make for some of the best material on the album altogether. But other than that, something else that impressed me was, in terms of musicality, this is, in my opinion, the most consistent that Logic has been to date. Because we get into the album, and the first two tracks, Hallelujah and Everybody, both, in my opinion, really solid tracks, lyrically and musically. But then we get to the third track on the album, Confess, and I think this is where we start to catch a bit more of a glimpse of Logic's growth when it comes to structuring his music and being creative with the way that his music comes together. I really liked the 80s rhythmic beat pattern that kind of kicks the song off, as well as the very 80s backing vocals that are kind of looped in as well. And on the back end of this track, there's some really dope, really hard-edged synths that kind of rise out from underneath the instrumental. I think that gives it a nice bit of texture. But what really impresses me about this song is bringing Killer Mike in for a feature. Instead of having him rapping a verse, he is doing a speech on the end of this track. And kind of talking to God. And I just really don't know who else could do a better job of what Killer Mike has done on this track than Killer Mike. He's having this talk more so a plea to God, sort of standing on his last leg of faith. And he speaks with so much passion and asks very insightful questions in this speech. Again, I just thought it was really creative to bring him in for this kind of a speech rather than just have him rap a verse on this song. And it adds, again, a really creative element to the track that makes it stand out from some of the others. So now moving back into some of the more topical tracks on the album, one of my favorites overall was Most Definitely. Now, what grabbed me immediately about this track is the very slipstream quality about the instrumental. I can almost imagine it as like this infinity pool for Logic to just swim lyrical laps in. Because he takes this track and he just spits over it like crazy, and it seems to only compliment him more the more syllables he's able to fit into each bar. The song Anxiety speaks about people with anxiety. Again, this kind of follows up on the idea of Logic speaking about things that are personal to him, and in this song particularly, he simultaneously is speaking for a large group of people who experience anxiety. The instrumental starts out here very lush and heavenly, and the lyrics are very general but blissful, and then all of a sudden this very heavy and dangerous instrumental comes marching in, kind of suffocating the sound. And then Logic is coming in with these very specific lyrics spit in a very intense tone, essentially trying to simulate musically having an anxiety attack come upon you by surprise. I think overall it's definitely an interesting idea to try to implement into your music, and I think it goes over well for the most part. It lacks a bit on the end of execution. I don't think it's as emotionally gripping as a song like You off the Tip of a Butterfly album. But again, it's something that adds creative structure to the music, and by the end of the song, Logic has his own little monologue about his first anxiety attack that happened like 2 years ago. And I think this idea of rationalizing or humanizing mental illness in multiple forms on this album is an incredible topic to speak on. And I think it's one that is going to set Logic apart from most, if not all, of his contemporaries. It's just a very select group of rappers that are going to talk about depression or anxiety in a vulnerable sense to try and empower their listeners who, struggle with the same issues. And so this leads into what I think is one of, if not the best song on the album, titled after the 1-800 phone number of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Again, I love this song topic because it's a place that a lot of musicians in general, but specifically rappers, are not going to go. And the way this story actually plays itself out is someone calling into this hotline, initially going into the phone conversation, wanting to take their life. And through the phone conversation, talking with the representative, eventually this person is brought to a point of stability, and at least for that time being, they choose their life. And I really love the chorus and the main refrain here that serves as sort of this anthem for people that, are really feeling this low. And the entire song is backed by a supporting choral performance that I think gives this song a little bit more emotion, as well as some really nice musical depth. Overall, I just think this song is a real home run, and probably one of Logic's best ever. But even with the great moments that this album does have, it most definitely has its flaws. I think overall it's actually the midsection of this track list that is probably the weakest, weaker than the beginning and weaker than the end for sure in my opinion. And I think this is ultimately started off with the song Killing Spree. Now essentially what I got from Killing Spree was it's supposed to be like what DNA was on the new Kendrick album, sort of detailing the circumstances of sort of the dangerous environment that Logic grew up in, as well as society's expectations of Logic and the people that come from the kind of place that he comes from. And he tries to do so with a very forthright hook that plays right at the beginning of this song. Ass, titties, pussy, money, weed. And overall, I actually like this song. I think this hook is okay. Definitely pretty rigid, and the instrumental in place doesn't really help that dynamic very much. And I get it, it's supposed to be kind of this jarring refrain. I think there was a better chorus to be made there, and probably would have gotten the point across just fine. But, going through the track, again, I like it, but it ultimately is just okay. But the thing for me about this song is at least, it has some impact. It is aggressive. It serves as a very clear and poignant moment on the track listing. It really does get its point across. It's just kind of the execution that I think is lacking here. But, this song does not fall into the background. It definitely commands your attention. And I think this is a really important element to discuss when we're talking about Logic music and the advancement of his craft, because when we go back to the Incredible True Story album, that is by far the biggest issue I have with that album altogether. A lot of it is honestly not bad, but a lot of it is so underwhelming or does not command your attention in any way. Moving forward into this midsection a little bit more, Take It Back and Ink Blot are two songs that just are total background music. Really, it starts with the instrumentals. Neither of them are that interesting. I do think probably Inkblot is the better of the two, especially considering that Take It Back has this instrumental that is just the same thing throughout the entire track. And the chorus, or the refrain that goes over the Take It Back song, is not interesting. It definitely doesn't change the pace of the record or give it any sort of new texture like a chorus should. Take it back, take it way back, take it way back, 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 blah, 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 blah. And then with Inkblot, it's a pretty short song. There is no real chorus here. But again, it's just underwhelming, starting with the instrumental. I think the Juicy J inclusion does give it, a new texture, but it definitely doesn't save the record, nor is he all that interesting on this track either. And then it just ends. And if I don't go look these lyrics up on Rap Genius, I don't know what the purpose of this song was, and I could have totally done without it, in retrospect. And so again, I think this has been one of Logic's greatest ailments pretty much throughout his entire career, and this is a section of the track list that definitely takes the album down a couple notches for me. But I will say that the saving grace of this section of the track listing is the very hard-nosed, aggressive, and politically charged track, America. The best thing about this song is that I don't even have to explain to you guys why it's excellent, other than the fact that this song features Chuck D and Black Thought and No ID. That alone says more than anything that I could say about this record. I think when it comes to people who are really serious about this rap game and making true hip-hop music, this is the biggest cosign you could ever have. So again, there really are a lot of moments worth talking about when it comes to this album, all across the track listing. There are moments to be excited about. There are moments worth reading into, looking into, analyzing. I think Logic made the album that he wanted to make, and I think the points that he was trying to get across, he did just that. I think the skits that Logic came up with came out really well, and I think they add a lot to the experience of the album. Neil deGrasse Tyson is totally the god I would love to believe in. And the last thing I want to say about the material on this album is that hidden J. Cole verse on the end of Africarian. Are you fucking kidding me? And so yeah, that's mostly what I have for the material of this album, which leads me to some adjectives to describe this LP. First thing I would say is that this is a very progressive album, and I mean that in two different ways. The first being that Logic is speaking to a new generation of rap fans that like a more progressive message and have more progressive political views. Thus, he is really trying to open the box on some things that previous generations of hip-hop weren't really speaking about. The second being the progression of Logic's sound, the progression of him as an artist. I think there's quite a bit of it on this album, and I really think it makes the difference here. Second, I would like to describe this album as specific. Logic definitely does deal with a plethora of topics and really, really big topics on top of that throughout this album. But for the most part, I don't really feel like it's shortchanging his detail of each of these matters. He really does get into the nitty-gritty of these topics and hashes them out over, a song or a skit or over the course of, 2 or 3 songs. Finally, I would describe this album as something I believe that Logic was intending for people to describe it as, and that would be relatable. Again, being young and broke, being depressed, contemplating suicide, dealing with what society projects onto you based on, what minority you may identify as, contemplating religion, what happens after you die, what is the meaning of life, things that every living human being has thought of at one point or another. And thus, I think the title Everybody is appropriate. So yeah, those are my thoughts on this album. Again, I think it's pretty solid. I would maybe say it's a step below the Joey Badass album, in my opinion, and I really like that Joey Badass album. I would definitely say this is the best Logic album I have heard throughout his career. So yeah, as always, what are you guys thinking? Did you like this album? Did you not like it? Did you know Logic's real name was Bob? Let's have that conversation down in the comments, and thank you for watching. As always, I have been Dev Del Molino. You have been whoever you are, and you'll just catch me on the next review that I do in a week or 2 or whatever. Bye.